Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm coming at you with another scrapbooking process video. This is a layout that I did of my sister-in-law's wedding. This is, I think, the third layout that I'm making from this event, and there will be more to come. I haven't even received the pro photos yet, so this is just me working with snapshots that I have. You know, we haven't had any events at all in the past 19 months or so, and so, you know, when a wedding comes along, I'm gonna scrapbook the crap out of it. So I have this story that I want to tell. It's kind of like a bit behind the scenes. I want to talk a little bit about the role that my daughters had in preparing for the reception. But I also have these photos of my sister-in-law and brother-in-law coming into the wedding. So first, I wanted to just show you what I did with these photos. So first of all, I had I just switched it to black and white, and then I cropped it in a little bit. And then I found that the bride and groom weren't standing out enough. So what I did was I just increased the contrast a tiny little bit, and that darkened the area in the trees behind them and just allowed the bride and groom to stand out in this photo a little bit. Sometimes when you just switch a photo over from color to black and white, it's too flat and you need to do a little bit of manipulation just to have the right things stand out on the photo. And so that's what I did. It was just like a slider on my photo editing app that I just moved over a tiny little bit to increase the contrast. So I am working with a hip kit here. I just had to go look it up because I couldn't remember which one. It's the August hip kit, and it has a lot of this collection from Vicki Boutin. It's the Color Study collection, and it also has these beautiful Prima flowers and lots of color. It's not really wedding themed, but the bride is actually an artist herself, and so this collection really spoke to me when thinking about scrapbooking Jennifer's wedding. So this is what I'm going with. It's also what I had on hand, and you know, those are always the best supplies to use, are the ones that you have. So I'm going to be diving into my stash a lot more lately. What I'm doing here is I am just familiarizing myself with this kit because it's been a while since I used it. I took a bit of a break between scrapbooking sessions here because I had to completely renovate my scrap room. Not completely, but pretty big changes in my scrap room. So you can keep an eye on my channel for some scrap room videos, some very, very detailed chatty ones. So keep an eye out for those if you're interested in that. I'm just having a look. This video is going to be a little bit more chatty than others just because I was live streaming as I did this. I was live streaming over on Patreon, which is why the footage is a little bit different. But I wanted to share this with my general audience over on YouTube as well. I like to share all of my process on my YouTube channel. So what I'm doing is I've basically decided to put aside the photo of my daughters, and I will scrapbook that another time, and I'm going to go ahead and scrapbook these. These are printed at 3x3-inch squares. I did crop down the photo a little bit, as I mentioned, and I edited it just slightly, and now I'm just trimming it up with my Fiskars little trimmer. This I got from Close to My Heart, and so thank you to them for sending that to me quite a while ago. I love it. It's lightweight and easy. It doesn't take up too much space on my desk. I really love having it. So I'm thinking here, so first of all, I have a leftover piece of white cardstock that I had run through an embossing folder for my last project, so you can check out my channel for that. And so I'm going to use that as one of my layers. And I had set aside this piece of paper from the Color Study collection, and I really, really wanted to use it as a background. And so it's, as you can see, it's really not very wedding themed. And so I'm going to do a few things to this background to make it not be, I don't want it to overshadow my photos. You guys, if you've watched me for long enough, look at this paper. It's not even rippable. It's like indestructible cardstock. I don't know what brand it is, but anyhow, if you've been following me long enough, you will know that I'm not afraid of bright, colorful, patterned backgrounds. However, on a wedding layout, I did want to kind of temper it down a little bit. So you'll see in a little while what I'm going to do about this. So what I did here was I wanted to layer that piece of that scrap piece that I had. It wasn't quite the right size. So what I decided to do and shape. So what I decided to do was tear off another piece, and I'm going to run it through my embossing folder. And so as you can see, I keep my Big Shot on a Razcog with all of my dies underneath and also my embossing folders. So you can see me here just running it through. And just make sure you have the right sandwich, like the right platforms that you're using there, because I did not, and I almost forced it through, which would have broken or resulted in some type of chaos in my scrap room. So what happened there was when I first put it through, because of the angle, I'm used to standing up, and because I was videotaping, I just anyhow, it turned out crooked, and I want the hearts on this piece of cardstock to line up with the hearts on the cardstock that I'm going to be layering this with. So you can see I just used a piece of washi tape to keep it in place as I put it through, because I can't quite get the same gross motor control of my own arms and machine when I'm doing this sitting down. So yeah, I basically didn't want you to just be looking at my hip as I did that. So that's why I sat down as I did it. So as you can see, it looks like the exact same paper, like just two pieces of the same paper. It is embossed with that heart pattern. And that heart embossing folder is from Stampin' Up. And it was the one that I almost used on my last layout, but I went with a different embossing folder instead on the last one. So I had the sample left over, and I'm trying to use up all my scraps. I don't have a good way of storing scraps anymore, so I'm trying to use them up as I go. So, and I will talk a little bit more about scrap storage in an upcoming video. So check out my channel if you're interested in that, because I don't have as much space as I used to, but I am still storing my scraps. I'm just doing it a little bit differently. I'm hanging on to them, some of them. So this is another piece of patterned paper that came in that same kit. I just looked it up, and that paper is called Daisy Tangle, and it is an exclusive paper to the Hip Kit Club. Beautiful black and white floral pattern there. Now, so one of my viewers on the live stream, I was chatting with Anne, who's one of my patrons, and she noticed that the yellow on that color wheel in the background was really throwing off the balance of the layout. And so I decided to switch it around. So thanks, Anne. That was a good catch. And I like how that allows more of the blue to show, because blue was one of the colors in the wedding. And you might see that I occasionally pull out the other photo with my daughters in it. That's because that photo has a picture of the cake, and it allows me to kind of keep in mind what color was the color that she chose for her wedding. Although her wedding, it wasn't really matchy-matchy. The bridesmaids didn't wear that color or anything, but that was obviously a color that she liked, so I wanted to include it. Here I am just looking at some embellishments to get a sense of what I might want to do. Now, that piece of chipboard flower that I'm keeping up there from Prima up in the corner, I don't like how that looks. It's too much of a competition with the floral pattern below it. I'm just leaving it there for some reason, even though I'm pretty sure I'm not going to use it. The embellishments that I'm looking at here a few minutes ago were from the kit. It was the Color Study collection from Vicki Boutin, and also a set of thickers. And what I'm deciding to do, because I can't find quite the right embellishment amongst the stickers and embellishments that came with the kit, is I'm thinking that I might just die cut myself some custom embellishments. And so I just took out some of my scrapbooking die cut, or dies, I guess they are. And I'm going to be thinking about what kind of things have more of a wedding feel, so hearts and flowers and that sort of thing. And as you can see, I had two different options for heart die cuts. This one over here on the left, I think is just too similar to the embossing folder that I've already used on this page. And so I'm deciding to go with this other heart die, and this I don't know the name of it. I rarely do this, but somehow I put this away and did not label it, so I do not know who made this die. I suspect it might be from Simon Says Stamp, because that is about the only die manufacturer that I use that isn't Lawn Fawn. And I'm pretty sure that it isn't Lawn Fawn, or it would be labeled. Oh, I don't know. If you know what it is, leave me a comment, and then I will post it in the information section, so that if anybody's looking for this, they can find it. But I would suspect it's Simon Says Stamp. It's a very nice heart outline. It comes with a couple of other hearts that you can layer with it, some solids and some outlines. And but I'm just using the one, and I cut it multiple times so that I could layer a couple of them. I wanted it to have just a little bit more of a substantial feel than what it was just all by itself. And I'm managing to get a small cluster in the bottom, as well as a bit of a larger cluster up in the top. And so I'm going with this diagonal look at this point, with hearts in the top left-hand corner and hearts in the bottom right-hand corner of my little cluster of layered papers. Now, one of the reasons that I'm leaving a wider border around these photos, so it's the white paper that I've used, the embossed white paper that I used for matting, I left that matting fairly thick, and that is because I have a sense that this is a fairly busy kind of a layout. It has this bright, colorful background, which I'm going to do something with right now. And then it also has that busy white paper in the background as well. And then the photos, I want you to kind of be able to have the photos have some distinction from those elements, those busier elements behind the photos. So that's what leaving a thicker background, like a thicker matting, does. Typically, I have a very, very thin matting, but in this case, I wanted it to be quite a bit wider. So I have a sense of how I want the layers to play out on top of this paper, but I do feel like this paper is just a little bit too bright. So what I wanted to do, I was very hot, so I had to take off my sweater. What I wanted to do was use some mixed media to cover this up. Basically, what I want to have here is a white wash over this. And gesso is going to be too opaque, and clear gesso is going to be too transparent. And paint, watered down paint, is going to be too wet and soak into the paper and compromise the background paper too much, and cause too much warping and problems in that way. So I've decided to combine some clear gesso. I have Liquitex clear gesso in the one bottle, and some golden regular gesso, just regular white gesso, in that tub. And oh, I haven't used this for a while. The lid was stuck shut. And it's going to take me a little bit of experimenting to figure out exactly what ratio I need for it to, I just want it to tone down this paper a little bit, but not completely cover it up. So I just grabbed a little palette knife and a little takeout container. We had sushi the night before, and so I just wanted to have a palette that I could just throw away and not have to figure out where it's at and that sort of thing. Okay, so I just went into, I think, my scraps there to grab a piece of paper. No, that was actually from my stash. I just sacrificed a paper to just check how opaque this is. So as you can see, it wasn't quite opaque enough. And so I added a bit of the golden white gesso, and I'm using my brayer. This is a speedball brayer that I have. And what's really interesting here is that I'm getting some really cool texture that I was not expecting. And so that's pretty cool. Like, I knew I'd get that kind of blocky, painterly look with the harsh edges. That's what I was looking for at the top and the bottom, those horizontal lines from the brayer. But what I wasn't expecting was for it to have this, and I think it's because it's gesso instead of paint, so it doesn't quite smooth out as much. And also maybe it's because I'm mixing two different mediums together, the clear and the white gesso. But it's leaving this almost like a spackled look. It doesn't have the dimension of spackle, but it looks a little bit almost like stucco, or yeah, like it looks like I purposely put texture on there, but it was completely accidental. So as I do this, I'm just mindful of a couple things. I want it to be more white behind where my layers are, and obviously a big part of this is going to be covered. So I want to make sure that some of those brayer lines, that is what I'm really looking for. It's part of why I'm using a brayer here. I want to make sure that some of those brayer lines are going to be visible behind my layers. And because you can always add more, but you can't take paint or gesso off of a project, I'm just going very slowly, layer by layer. And I kind of feel like I could have left it right here and it would have been great, but I do go ahead and put on more on the tops and the bottoms. I was just feeling like it was too bright, and I'm feeling a little bit too lazy to add more product to my container. So I'm just kind of trying to get the last little bits out. It's not the greatest container for mixed media because it has all those little ridges and media is getting stuck in it and that sort of thing, but it's fine. It's fine. It's great because I can just toss it in the garbage or I think I threw it in the recycling. I don't know if you're allowed to put things in the recycling if they have paint on them, but that's what I did. So I'm back. I just washed those things right away only because they have gesso on them, and gesso is a little bit more of a pain in the butt to clean up after. So I wanted to make sure that I got at those tools and just rinse them off while it was still wet. So I'm using my heat gun there I used it to dry in between each of those layers of gesso, but I also used it to dry it at the end, and I just blasted it from behind, as Anne reminded me, just to make sure that it is drying evenly, and that helps with the curling of your background paper so that it doesn't warp up too much. I don't generally mind warping on my background paper because I find that once you put it in the page protector, it usually flattens out. But it certainly is easier to work with when it's laying flat as you're designing as well. So I'm just saying here that I have been keeping these foam adhesive from Stampin Up. These are dimensional adhesive. I've been keeping them in this drawer for a long time, and I only recently labeled the drawers, and it's so much easier to find them, even though they've been in the same drawer for a long time. I don't know why I constantly pull the wrong drawer open looking for those. So, obvious life hack there, label your drawers. It really does make a difference. So I am thinking here about what else I might want to add to these layers. So basically the structure of this page is pretty much decided at this point, and now comes the fun part. Sometimes it's the challenging part, but it's the fun part too of deciding what I want to put on here. Now, I remembered that I had this ink. This is from Stampin' Up. It's called Pacific Point. I just recently replaced all of my old Stampin' Up ink pads with new ones. It was quite an expensive endeavor, but really worthwhile because I love those inks, and I hadn't been using them because they were just difficult to store in their old format. So I sold all of my old ones and the spinner that they came on, and I used that money and added some more to get the complete collection of Stampin' Up colors because I love them so much. So I just went over to my stash here and grabbed some Stampin' Up Pacific Point cardstock as well. And I think what else was I doing over there? I looked in my stamps, and then I decided to grab my letter dies, my alpha dies, because I'm looking for a title here, and I was thinking my title would be Mr. and Mrs. Adam and Jennifer, or Mrs. and Mr. Adam and Jennifer and Adam. I'm kind of thinking like Jennifer is on the left and Adam is on the right, so I'm thinking about Mrs. and Mr. Also, that's kind of a little bit more unexpected than Mr. and Mrs., so it makes for a catchier title. So I've decided to go with this alpha die. I almost called it a stamp. It is from Echo Park, and the name of it is Script Alphabet Die Set. It's a bit of an older product, and as you can see, I just pulled over my big shot, and I wasn't sure if it would cut properly with one pass. It was looking a little bit like I needed a little shim, but it turns out it just it cut fine if I just passed it through a couple of times. So I really love making my own alphabet dies, even though my die cuts, even though I have so many alpha stickers that it's kind of mind-boggling that I would actually need to make my own. But still, it's nice in these kinds of situations. This blue is almost the exact blue that is on her wedding cake. So it was important to me that this color was right. I find that these meaningful layouts, like layouts about somebody's wedding that she planned for and it was delayed because of the pandemic, like there's a lot of emotion around this event. So I want to give this layout a little bit more thoughtfulness than I might if I was, scrapbooking, oh, the kid's got a new backpack, or, some of those other things that are equally important. Well, maybe not equally important, but they are important in terms of documenting your everyday life and those sorts of things. But I can feel like I can be a little bit more quick and not deliberate when I'm scrapbooking something like that versus scrapbooking a wedding. I really want to kind of take my time and make sure that I make this layout reflective of the importance of the date. So there's my Razcog that holds all of those letter stickers that I told you I have. And I'm looking for an ampersand to put on this. So I've got Mrs. and Mr. to cut out. And as you saw, I had to run that die through twice in order to get that because there are 2 R's and 2 M's and 2 dots. And now I'm just looking for an ampersand, and a stamp was suggested to me, and I could have done a stamp, and I don't know why I was stuck on this idea of getting a letter sticker, but I pulled out these letter stickers. These are thickers, and they're called Rockabye. I've got several sets stuffed into one 6x12-inch bag. I do repackage my stickers. And I thought if I got a white ampersand, maybe I could ink it with this Stampin' Up ink, that's Pacific Point, that I used for the die cuts already for the Mr. and Mrs. And I used the cardstock for that, so I thought I'll use the ink here. Well, the problem with this is that although this is dye ink and it will dry on paper, with foam, it really won't dry, or maybe you just have to be super duper patient. But it occurred to me that those ink pads are made out of foam, and the ink doesn't dry in them. So maybe this ink is just never going to dry on this foam thicker. So I've set it aside. At this point, I haven't realized that it's just not going to dry. So I've set it aside on the wax paper, and I'm going to make my die cut letters into stickers by using my Xyron X. I'm pulling this out from the archives of my scrap room. I haven't used this in a very, very long time, but I really do love using this Xyron for die cut letters in particular. So there's one tip that I have for you when using a Xyron. One is you have to really push on those letter stickers to get all of the glue stuck to that plastic backing that you're going to then peel off. My tip is to use an embossing tip. And I just have the tip here. This is a little thing that you can put on a tool. I haven't even put it on the tool. I'm just using the embossing tip, and I'm just going around all of the little tiny edges, and I'm pressing fairly hard. What that does is when I pull this off, all of the stickiness sticks to that over sheet, and I don't have all the goopy little edges that sometimes you get when you use the Xyron X, and if you don't do that little embossing step. So I find that embossing step, not only is it fairly satisfying to go around all of the edges of those stickers, of those letters, but it also does a really good job of making the letters neater and easier to work with. So I'm looking for sponge dauber. I had 2 on my desk. One of them had remnants of white from many, many years ago, and as you can see, it was still wet. It seems like many inks don't really dry in foam. So then the other one had black on it, just a tiny bit of black, and it was dry. So I went ahead and got some ink from that same Pacific Point ink pad from Stampin' Up. And I'm just doing a little bit of tone on tone shading with a sponge finger dabber. And basically this is just giving those letter stickers a tiny bit more dimension and making them look a little bit more finished off. And I'm being kind of messy with it. Like, it doesn't I'm not spending a whole lot of time to make sure that a certain edge has the shadow and the other edge doesn't, to make it look realistic or anything. I just want to make it look a little bit more interesting and give it a little bit more dimension on my page. As opposed to, I just felt like it was too uniform looking the way that it was, and particularly where my ampersand is going to be inked, I want them to kind of look like they're matching even. So as you can see, it's not drying. I am using it's still not drying. Even with a heat tool, it's like not at all, even almost dry. Massive amounts of ink are coming off of it. Basically, I have an ampersand shaped ink pad right there. So what I decided was, I had this marker that was actually broken that was sitting on my desk, but I could still get enough alcohol ink out of there. And of course, alcohol ink will dry. It'll dry on anything. It's a permanent ink, and it will go on slick surfaces and whatnot, and it does dry. So I decided that color just happened. It was the only one that I had, but I just decided that color was close enough that I would use that. So this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do at this point. I'm going to put on this Mr. and Mrs. And now these are inked letters, so be careful that, especially, I'm putting them on a white background, so I want to just be careful that I'm not going to get an ink blob on that white cardstock, because it will stand out a lot. And then I'll put the ampersand. So my title here will be Mrs. and Mr. And as time passes, I realize I'm not going to be able to put Jennifer and Adam on there. We know who they are. They're our dear sister and sister-in-law and brother-in-law. So I don't feel the need to put Jennifer and Adam on there. Now, I'm still not happy with that silly foam ampersand. So you see what I did there? I just traced it onto that same blue paper that I've cut the letters out of. And I'm just fussy cutting around it. It's not perfect. And here's where I should have just given in to Anne's idea of just find yourself a stamp. I could have inked it up in that same ink and stamped it and cut it out. Could have even used my brother's scan and cut if I didn't want to fussy cut it. But I was being stubborn here. I was like, I am going to use this ampersand if it is the death of me. So I just keep these pieces of foam on hand that I can use for these sorts of things. So I want to be able to poke a hole in the center of that. And then I decided I'm actually going to use, instead of poking a hole with my scissors and cutting it out, I thought that would be too tight and difficult to do. So I grabbed my glass mat and I'm just using in a very awkward way, using my little utility knife there. What do you call that? Oh, I've forgotten the name of it, but you know what it's called, a X-Acto knife. There you go. Mine is made by Fiskars. And yeah, there you go. It's sort of okay. It's done. And it matches-ish. I mean, it's not the right font, obviously. And I was thinking if I could just like piece together two offcuts from that die cut set that look a little bit like an ampersand, but I thought I'm not feeling creative enough to do that. This is done. I'm going to do it. So I ran it through my Xyron. I'm also going to make sure I run that embossing tool all around the little edges of it. And now to make it match my letter stickers, I'm just taking that same ink. I thought I had enough on it already, but it had dried. So I grabbed a little bit more ink and a little bit more ink. And because it's on this wax backing, it's a great way to just leave it there while you're inking it and it stays put. There was a tiny little bit of goop that didn't get stuck to that oversheet, and so I just had to use my little piercing tool to get rid of that. I'm being very cautious with my fingers because there have been multiple times that I've accidentally left a big black or blue smudge on something because I didn't know that there was ink on my fingers, so I keep baby wipes on hand. I'm just going to use my Stampin' Up! Adhesive. What is this exactly called? It is called Fine Tip Glue Pen. And I'm just trying this out. I've never used it before. It has that fine tip, but it's a very, very liquidy glue. So I'm guessing that that means that it's not going to get clogged as much. And I've used it a couple of times and it hasn't clogged. I bought another glue many, many years ago in a similar bottle that was a different brand. And I've also repackaged other glue into similar bottles, like the fine liner bottles that you can buy. And I've had great problems with clogging and not being able to get the lid back inside of itself. And so I've decided to give it another try with this brand. And so far, so good. I've used it a couple times and it hasn't clogged yet. So I just used some matte multi-medium matte by Ranger, which is it's just a liquid glue that I've been using lately. I'm kind of using it when I might have reached for my Tombow Mono multi-adhesive. They're pretty similar, except that the multi-medium matte will not stay sticky forever if any of it oozes out. So I had done a little bit of journaling ahead of time only because I was live streaming. I knew I'd be live streaming this, and I'm terrible at thinking of journaling while feeling the pressure of needing to talk to people and come up with clever ideas on the spot. So I just wrote my journaling, what I wanted to say ahead of time. It's not terribly clever or anything. It's just kind of what I wanted to say about it. I've decided to do my journaling on these lines. And what you saw me doing there was just kind of like in my mind, laying out where all the letters would land just to make sure that I was giving myself enough room to do it. I will read the journaling to you now. And the pen that I'm using is, I'm just going to grab it so I can tell you the right name of it. It is a Tombow Mono Twin pen. It is an oil-based pen and it's the darkest pen that I have, and it's really great for drawing or writing over mixed media supplies because it will sit on top, because it's oil-based. It'll sit on top of paint. In this case, it'll sit on top of gesso and whatnot. So my journaling says, that moment we all were waiting for, to see the happy couple join the reception as wife and husband. It was a moment they had waited far too long for. What a way to make 2021 a year to remember. So, backstory here is that this wedding was supposed to happen in August of 2020, and for pandemic reasons, it did not. And it wasn't even clear that it would happen this year because we had restrictions locally here during the time that the wedding was being planned. We were hoping that they would be lifted by the time the wedding actually happened, but as it came closer and closer, the fourth wave was starting to pick up. Anyhow, there were some, changes or, things didn't go exactly as planned, but it was a lovely, lovely wedding. I think that it did go as planned as far as, once they finalized their plan, they stuck with it and felt good about it. But I think that they would have much, much, much rathered have many, many, many more people there. They have a huge social circle of people from all over the world who are unfortunately just unable to travel here because of travel restrictions where they are or where we are. So that was pretty unfortunate, but it was a really, really wonderful, wonderful wedding. Very, very intimate, and really great. Beautiful, beautiful wedding. Outdoors by the lake. It was absolutely gorgeous. Ugh. One of the most fun weddings I have ever been to. So what I'm doing here is just coming up with a cluster. So as you can see, one of those cardstock foam stickers from the kit is perfect. It's like the right colors. It has that same shade of blue. But then the other one that was similar to it had the wrong colors in it. So I'm just making another cluster based just from some of the other stickers that are there. Obviously it has a different look because it doesn't have that white around it. But pardon me, I'm just putting, I'm trying to get some of the right colors. So I've introduced that dark pink in the first cluster that was all one piece, and then I reused it up in the top cluster, so now I want to use it down here in the third cluster as well, so that each cluster has some of that blue, some of that pink, a couple of leaves. And as I'm looking on, it's a little bit tricky to make your own cluster like this because it's not going to look like the manufactured cluster because it's drawn, right? So you can only get these stickers so close together. Because they're foam, you can't really overlap them. So I had a bit of challenge doing this, but I think it turned out okay. I'm just kind of playing around with it to make it look a little bit more natural. I think I'm just going to, you know, try something here, move it, pull it up, move it here. I think adding that other pink one just really finished off that last cluster there. So I'm thinking about what else this needs, and it does feel like it needs something else. I am on my phone. I don't know what I'm doing here, but oh yes, I'm looking up the date. Looking up the date of the wedding. And I should have known it was August 21st. I really should have remembered that because my own anniversary is June 21st, and we kind of talked about that. About how easy it will be for me to remember Jen's wedding. So maybe now I'll remember it. So I just used a roller date stamp there, and I just didn't ink the little, it has like a little design in front of it. I just didn't ink that part so that I just got the date. And now I'm using some of this thread. This is my favorite thread to use on layouts. It's Coats and Clark extra strong upholstery thread. I have this in white, black, and a golden beigey color. And I really, really like it because it is, first of all, it holds a curvy shape more than regular thread does. And it's also thicker than regular thread, so it does stand out. It's a little bit easier to see it. And it's the kind of supply that you buy probably once in your whole scrapbooking career, and it'll last you for almost ever and ever and ever. So it is a good investment, even though it's a little bit pricier than regular thread. If you like to embellish with thread, one spool will last you a good long time. So here I am showing this because I erroneously believe I am done, but I am not done. I left it on my desk and came back in to take some photos. And when I came back in to take some photos, I realized that those hearts are not standing out quite enough. And I also realized that they have a bit of a purplish look to them as opposed to the blue that I was really going for. So I stuck some waxed paper behind them, and which was easy to do because they were only glued down at the very bottoms that were tucked under the photo. And I'm just adding a little bit of ink using that same dauber here, just adding a little bit of blue ink here to make them stand out from their background a little bit more, and also just ink, like add that blue color. Now, as you can see, I got some ink on that background paper because I didn't stick the wax paper in exactly the right place, but it's just a tiny little bit, and I notice it, but I'm guessing that, well, I'm hoping that when people look at this layout in my scrapbook, that they won't notice that I made a little mistake there. I was not prepared to pull that layout apart and try to patchwork the paper or anything like that, so I just left it as it was. So here are some of the close-up photos and not so close-up photos of the final product once all of those adjustments were made. As you can see, the title stands out really nicely, and the layers and interest are just enough added detail there to not take away from the photo or the story that I want to tell here. I wanted to be fairly minimal in the embellishing, but still have it look like it is finished and ready to go into the scrapbook. So thanks so much for watching. Take care and have a really great scrappy week. You can check out my Patreon if you're interested in real-time versions and monthly live streams. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next process video right here on my channel. Take care and have a really great scrappy week.